Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and today I'll be responding to another question that was raised on my video on neoliberalism by one of the viewers. And the question was simply stated, why is it that so many people living under the neoliberal capitalistic regime often buy into it, regardless of the fact that it impacts their lives negatively? So that's really a complex question because it forces us to look into construction of human identities and subjectivities. And I can neither answer it in the comments nor can I answer it comprehensively here in a brief conversation. But, I'll try it. So there are two ways of approaching this question. Why do people, in other words, work against their own self-interest, against their own material class conditions, right? One could be to answer these questions from a general understanding of ideology according to Marx, right? The epistemological version of ideology. So what is that? Generally speaking, we could say that in any given productive system, in any given capitalistic society, there is a dominant group, there is a superstructure and the base, and ideology is the means through which the dominant group convinces the base or the proletariat or the workers to see the world from the point of view of the dominant group. So if we applied that, then obviously the simple answer to the question posed could be that it's because people are seeing the world ideologically. That's a very simple answer, but I don't think so. It's a very comprehensive answer because it posits people as not conscious about the world in which they live, and it kind of gives a monopoly over knowledge to the dominant group. But we know through our lived experiences that people, regardless of their education or whatever, may not be highly literal, but tend to know their lived conditions. But there are other ideologies too, of course. Religion plays an important role in kind of convincing people to be content, right? Not content, sorry. To be content with their lived conditions because it postpones their desires to a hereafter. So I come from a Muslim culture. I've often heard people say, this is our lot in life. God is testing us. That's why he has made us poor. And if we just try to be good Muslims, good human beings, we will be rewarded in the hereafter. That's a powerful ideology that forces people to accept their lot in life, right? And then continue working within the constraints that are the very givens of their life for a reward in hereafter. You can see in Hinduism, if there is a strong belief in rebirth, which you have to have, right? Then caste is rationalized in the same sense, because what you're expected to do is to maintain the duties of your caste, because your rebirth depends on how strictly and how honestly did you perform the duties of your caste, right? And the powerful impact of it is that a person born in an ek jati caste, right, or even out of caste, will regulate his or her own behavior. So ideology then determines for us our place in society, but also convinces us in so many imperceptible ways to continue doing what we do and accept the social and economic hierarchies as they are. That's why in Marx, the purpose of revolution was to remove that veil so that people could see the difference in their lived experience and then strive to change it. Now, on a side note, Paulo Freire, in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, does the same thing, right? He also tells us that there is an oppressor group and an oppressed group, and it will take a special kind of pedagogy for the oppressed to first of all realize the nature of that oppression, right? Dislodge it from their souls, so to speak, and then see the world as it is and then try to change it. Right? I have quite a few videos on that. Now, another way of explaining as to why people continue to be the way they are within neoliberal order, what makes them just follow whatever life they have, comes from an insight by Deleuze, right? And that's the famous interview, Intellectuals in Power. I'll post a link to it in the description, to which Gayatri Spivak had responded in her most highly anthologized essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? There is a moment there where Deleuze is trying to explain class interest, right? And he says, and I'm kind of paraphrasing it, that people find their interest where desire has already placed it. Now, that's a very instructive insight. Now, keep in mind that for Deleuze, desire is not produced by a lack. We don't desire something because we find a lack and try to achieve it. Contra Lacan, what Deleuze and Guattari suggest is that desire is part of being human. Okay, we are desiring machines, right? So let's go back to that insight. If we find our interest where desire has placed it, then within neoliberal capital, right, what is the narrative that is being sold to us? That if you're innovative, if you work hard, since there is no government regulation, since capital is free and it's a free market economy, right, you will then, because of the reduction of those restraints, eventually rise up, right? And your station in life will change. So even when you're working here, your interest, your desire has already placed it over there, right? I hope that makes sense. So in that sense, in neoliberal capital, we are not necessarily concerned with where we are in life, right? We're not fighting to change that. We are trying to protect the interest of the place where we could be, right? And that redirects our energies in protecting the interests of a class or a place which we aspire to, but are not there yet. And that creates a vacuum, the vacuum where we are no longer fighting to change the class immanently where we are, right? That, in my opinion, especially in highly developed societies like United States, in my view, is what encourages us unconsciously to constantly keep looking towards where we could be and then keep working where we are within the conditions that we are, that we have, because we have convinced ourselves that if something goes wrong, it's our fault, because material conditions have been provided to give us this chance because we live in a so-called free society. That's another way of explaining why people accept their lot in the world, in the class where they are, because their interests are aligned with the classes above them. Now, another thing important to note in this context is that we ourselves, our solidarities are fractured, right? Since the state is no longer giving us this larger chance to build secular or rational solidarities by privatizing so many things, we have now devolved into religious, sectarian, ethnic, racial identities. And what that does within the body of a nation is that even if we share the same class, our interests are in opposition to each other. Race will trump class solidarity, right? Similarly, religion would trump class solidarity. Because we are looking at the world from our own religious perspective, so anyone working next to us who shares the same material conditions, we will be reluctant to build solidarities with them because somehow they need to be excluded because they are a different race, they are a different religion, they might have a different place of origin. So these are some of my tentative answers, right, to the question as to why people constantly remain committed to the very neoliberal order, which is unequal, which is hierarchical, and in which more and more people are falling into poverty. I believe that it's partly ideological, right? And ideological differences play a role. And that in terms of our psyche, somehow our interest has already been placed at a place which we aspire to. And hence, we are not even protecting where we are and trying to change that. I hope this answers somewhat the question that someone had posed. I would be happy to further elaborate on it. And please feel free to comment and let me know what you think. Please feel free to share your thoughts. I do apologize if I don't get engaged in detailed discussions in the comments. Part of it is because, I don't have a lot of time, but also it is hard for me to engage in a conversation in the comments. In order to really have a conversation with me, it would be really appropriate and best if you could join me in one of my live webinars, and then I can really try to answer your questions. Please note that none of this knowledge is exhaustive, and there is no single way of looking at things. And more importantly, you will only understand concepts and ideas better through careful reading of materials and texts. These videos, they are just a guideline, they are just an incentive and maybe a hint, but they cannot be an exhaustive, all-explaining resource. That's all. I hope you're staying safe and taking care of each other. Please continue to do so. I will now see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.